The grand ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers, each one casting a shimmering glow over the elite crowd gathered for the evening. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, fresh flowers, and the subtle tension of whispered gossip. Victoria Reed, 8 months pregnant, walked carefully through the crowd, her hands resting protectively over her rounded belly. Her elegant gown, a flowing shade of deep sapphire, hugged her figure gracefully, and her hair was perfectly styled, reflecting the image of sophistication and poise she had always cultivated. Yet beneath her composed exterior, her heart pounded with anxiety. She had attended these events countless times, but tonight felt different. Tonight carried an unspoken threat she could sense even before she stepped into the room. Jonathan Reed, the billionaire husband whose wealth and influence were known worldwide, stood at the center of the ballroom with his mistress, Eliza Hart. His hand rested possessively on her waist, and his smile radiated confidence and arrogance. The audience, many of whom had admired the Reeds' marriage, now whispered in confusion and disbelief as Jonathan signaled Victoria to approach. Victoria's stomach tightened with dread, her pulse quickening as she realized what he intended. Guests' cameras clicked incessantly, capturing every moment, every expression, and every flicker of emotion. The whispers grew louder, some polite, some sharp with judgment, but all of them carried a sense of scandal. When Victoria reluctantly stepped forward, Jonathan's commanding voice rang across the room, ordering her to kneel before Eliza. The words hit like a physical blow. The pregnant woman's knees trembled as she obeyed, her dignity hanging by a thread as the elite crowd watched in stunned silence. Her heart ached with betrayal, not only from the public nature of the act but from the man she had trusted, the one who had promised love, protection, and partnership. She felt the weight of every eye upon her, every camera flash searing into her skin, yet she fought to maintain composure, refusing to cry or waver despite the emotional onslaught. Eliza, standing confidently above Victoria, smirked subtly, fully aware of the humiliation she was inflicting. The contrast between the two women could not have been starker, one glowing with cruelty and dominance, the other struggling to maintain grace under the unbearable weight of betrayal. The crowd murmured in disbelief, some sympathetic to Victoria, others captivated by the scandal. This moment encapsulated the shocking imbalance of power, the audacity of arrogance, and the emotional devastation of a woman forced into submission in the most public and demeaning way imaginable. In those long, unbearable minutes, Victoria's suffering became the centerpiece of the evening, setting the stage for a story of injustice, resilience, and the eventual fight to reclaim dignity and respect. In the early days of their marriage, Victoria had believed she had stepped into a fairy tale. Jonathan Reed was everything the world portrayed him to be: charming, intelligent, ambitious, and intoxicatingly attractive. Their wedding had been a lavish affair, the kind that people spoke about for months, filled with crystal chandeliers, cascading flowers, and promises whispered in private moments that felt sacred. Victoria had been captivated not only by his wealth and social standing but by the warmth he had shown in those early days, the way he had made her feel cherished and admired. Friends and family marveled at the apparent perfection of their union, but none of them could see the quiet, intimate exchanges that had cemented her belief in their bond. She trusted him completely, unaware that behind the polished smiles and public appearances, cracks were beginning to form. Jonathan's attentiveness at first seemed endless. He would appear unexpectedly with gifts that showed he remembered the smallest details, bring her to romantic dinners atop skyscrapers, and spend hours speaking about their dreams for the future. Victoria soaked in every word, every gesture, convinced that their love was unshakable. The world saw them as a couple in perfect harmony, a billionaire and his devoted wife who embodied success, grace, and affection. Yet as time passed, Jonathan's attention subtly shifted. Business trips became longer and more frequent, excuses grew thinner, and the warmth that had once defined their private moments became rare and fleeting. Victoria noticed these changes but attributed them to the pressures of running a global empire, choosing to believe that patience and understanding would restore the closeness they once shared. The first hints of betrayal appeared quietly. Rumors began circulating through their social circles, mentions of a woman seen at corporate events, and glimpses of intimate dinners that weren't meant to include her. Victoria, loyal and trusting, chose to ignore them, convincing herself that her love could withstand distance and distraction. She told herself that these were harmless misunderstandings, small lapses in judgment that would not threaten the foundation of their marriage. She remained devoted, hiding her anxieties behind a serene smile and continued grace, determined to maintain the illusion of perfection not only for the public but for the man she loved. Pregnancy, which should have been a moment of celebration and shared joy, marked the turning point. Jonathan's detachment grew more pronounced, his absences more frequent, and his interest in her well-being waned. Gifts replaced meaningful conversations, and presence was replaced with neglect. The woman who had once inspired devotion now found herself navigating fear, exhaustion, and emotional isolation without support. Yet Victoria's loyalty never faltered. She continued to uphold the marriage with dignity, hoping her patience would rekindle the love they had shared. Beneath the surface of wealth, glamour, and social admiration, a different reality existed, a marriage teetering on the edge, a husband indulging secret desires, and a wife whose love and loyalty were being quietly exploited. The seeds of betrayal had been planted long before the world witnessed it, growing in silence, nourished by neglect and secrecy. Victoria's faith in Jonathan was absolute, even as the cracks widened, setting the stage for the devastating public humiliation that would expose the true nature of the life she had once believed to be perfect. Isabella Hart moved through the world with the confidence of someone who knew exactly the power she held. She had entered Jonathan Reed's life subtly at first, an alluring presence at corporate dinners and charity events, gradually weaving herself into his routines and desires. Unlike Victoria, whose devotion had been quiet, steadfast, and moral, Isabella thrived on visibility, influence, and control. Every smile, every carefully chosen outfit, every whispered word around Jonathan was a calculated assertion of dominance. She understood the art of public perception, and she wielded it effortlessly, ensuring that everyone who watched could see her as the woman who commanded the billionaire's attention completely. Her social media profiles became a stage where her power was showcased without restraint. Photos of luxurious getaways, private yachts, and glamorous evenings out with Jonathan were carefully curated to project indulgence and exclusivity. Captions hinted at superiority and freedom. "Why settle for responsibilities when life offers choices?" she would write, a subtle jab at Victoria's struggles and the life she had tried to preserve. Each post was a demonstration of control, a way to reinforce her dominance over the marriage that had once seemed unshakable. Followers admired her beauty and poise, unaware of the manipulation and cruelty that underpinned the glamorous facade. Public appearances amplified Isabella's influence. She would attend galas, charity balls, and social events with Jonathan at her side, always perfectly poised, always commanding attention. She whispered in his ear, laughed with him, and basked in the subtle discomfort she could sense from Victoria whenever their worlds intersected. The contrast was undeniable: Isabella in control, radiant, and untouchable; Victoria isolated, loyal, and increasingly vulnerable. This dynamic was not accidental, it was a deliberate power play, a psychological assertion of dominance designed to reinforce Isabella's position and destabilize Victoria's confidence. Every interaction, every carefully framed photograph, and every public smile served a purpose. Isabella's indulgence in luxury and influence was not merely about wealth, it was about control, visibility, and the pleasure of watching Victoria's patience and loyalty bend under the weight of neglect and humiliation. In Isabella's world, power was measured in emotional conquest, in public perception, and in the subtle, undeniable triumph of being the one chosen over the wife who had sacrificed so much. The stark contrast between suffering and indulgence intensified the emotional tension, foreshadowing the eventual reckoning that would challenge her carefully constructed dominance. Victoria's days had become a delicate balance between managing the physical demands of late-stage pregnancy and enduring the unbearable emotional weight of betrayal. Each morning brought aches and fatigue that reminded her constantly of the life growing within her, yet the pain was compounded by the absence of the man who had once promised love and protection. Jonathan's neglect was not subtle, it was deliberate. He skipped appointments, ignored calls from her doctors, and flaunted his new relationship publicly, leaving Victoria to navigate not only her own health but the welfare of their unborn child without the support she desperately needed. Friends and family tried to intervene, offering support, meals, and comforting words, but even their presence could not fully bridge the void left by her husband. Victoria's mother arrived one evening with worry etched on her face, insisting she take care of herself, that she let someone advocate for her at medical appointments. Her siblings and closest friends expressed anger on her behalf, yet all the concern in the world could not change the reality that she was fighting this battle largely alone. The betrayal of the man she trusted, combined with the physical strain of pregnancy, weighed on her like a constant, invisible force pressing her down. Doctors expressed increasing concern over Victoria's health, noting elevated stress levels, high blood pressure, and signs of exhaustion that could affect both mother and child. They urged her to ensure she was not left alone for extended periods, to take precautions, and to communicate any changes immediately. But despite their advice and warnings, the reality was that the father of her child remained absent, indifferent, and careless. Each missed call from Jonathan, each moment of silence when she needed reassurance, felt like a sharp stab, deepening the sense of isolation and injustice. Victoria found herself repeating mantras of self-encouragement and drawing on inner reserves of strength she had never fully needed before. Amid the struggle, a quiet resilience began to emerge. Victoria learned to advocate for herself at medical appointments, to speak firmly with doctors about her needs, and to make critical decisions regarding her health and the baby's safety without Jonathan's consent or interference. She discovered the depth of her own endurance, finding a rhythm in the chaos that allowed her to prioritize both her life and her child's future. Each small victory, a restful night, a successful medical consultation, a moment of emotional clarity, reinforced her confidence and growing self-reliance. Victoria also began preparing emotionally for the eventual confrontation with Jonathan and the mistress. She documented evidence of neglect, screenshots of their public flaunting, and the emotional distress she had endured. These preparations were not born of vengeance but of necessity, a way to protect herself and her child, and to ensure that when the time came, she would not be silenced or ignored. In this period of suffering, her maternal instinct and moral strength blossomed. What began as vulnerability transformed into a quiet, formidable power. Victoria's struggle was shaping her into a woman ready not only to survive but to reclaim her dignity, justice, and ultimately, her life. Victoria's decision to take Jonathan to court was not made lightly. The emotional toll of public humiliation, the betrayal she had endured throughout her pregnancy, and the relentless cruelty of her husband had reached a point where silence was no longer an option. With her legal team meticulously prepared, she filed charges citing emotional abuse, neglect, and public humiliation, ensuring that every instance of Jonathan's cruelty, from forcing her to kneel before his mistress at the gala to ignoring her medical needs, was documented. The filing itself made headlines, and the story quickly went viral, turning what had been a private torment into a matter of public record. Courtroom day arrived with a palpable intensity. Reporters, photographers, and members of the public packed the gallery, their cameras and notepads poised to capture every word. Victoria entered with quiet dignity, her hand resting on her belly, her eyes steady despite the storm of anticipation. Jonathan, on the other hand, appeared unsettled, his usual arrogance tempered by the knowledge that his misdeeds were now being scrutinized in a formal, legal setting. The judge, presiding with calm authority, reminded everyone that the court was not a spectacle but a place for truth, fairness, and accountability. Evidence was presented meticulously. Social media posts flaunting Jonathan's relationship with Isabella were displayed on large screens, time-stamped during moments of Victoria's vulnerability and suffering. Photographs from the gala where Victoria had been humiliated were introduced, alongside witness testimonies from friends, family, and even staff members who had observed his neglect and cruelty firsthand. Each piece of evidence painted a damning picture. Jonathan's wealth and status did not excuse his callous treatment, nor did they shield him from scrutiny. His mistress, Isabella, was implicated as an active participant in the humiliation, with text messages and correspondence showing that she had encouraged and manipulated Jonathan's actions to her advantage. The courtroom was tense with a mixture of shock, sympathy, and moral outrage. Victoria's courage in coming forward contrasted sharply with Jonathan's attempts to defend himself, which rang hollow in the face of overwhelming evidence. The public, following live coverage, reacted strongly, with social media platforms erupting in discussion and condemnation. Commentators, legal analysts, and even casual viewers expressed astonishment at the audacity of Jonathan's behavior and the complicity of Isabella. Witness after witness corroborated Victoria's account, emphasizing not only the emotional damage inflicted but the broader implications of her husband's abuse. The moral reckoning was unavoidable. Privilege and influence could not erase wrongdoing. Isabella's smug confidence began to falter under scrutiny, her image tarnished as much as Jonathan's. By the end of the day, the courtroom had become more than a venue for legal proceedings. It was a stage where justice, truth, and public morality converged. Victoria's bravery illuminated the undeniable reality: no amount of wealth or power could exempt someone from accountability, and the consequences of cruelty, manipulation, and betrayal were finally catching up to both Jonathan and his mistress. The courtroom was silent, every eye fixed on the judge as he prepared to deliver a ruling that had captured the attention of the entire city. Reporters held their breath, cameras poised, and even Jonathan Reed, usually the epitome of control and arrogance, seemed tense, aware that the consequences of his actions were finally catching up to him. Victoria sat quietly, her hands resting protectively over her belly, her posture calm yet resolute, a stark contrast to the anxious energy radiating from her husband. The judge's gavel struck, a sharp, decisive sound that immediately commanded attention. The court finds that Jonathan Reed is guilty of emotional abuse, public humiliation, and neglect of his spouse during her pregnancy, the judge declared, his voice firm and unwavering. Murmurs swept through the courtroom, some in shock, others in agreement, as the gravity of the verdict settled over everyone present. The decision was more than a legal judgment, it was a public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, a moral reckoning for a man who had believed his wealth and status could shield him from accountability. The consequences were immediate and unprecedented. Jonathan was ordered to perform acts of restitution and public accountability designed to reverse the humiliation he had inflicted on Victoria. He would issue a formal public apology, attend counseling sessions, and participate in a court-mandated community service program that would be documented and publicly reported. More strikingly, he was required to acknowledge, in the presence of witnesses, the role his mistress, Isabella, had played in manipulating and enabling his cruel behavior. The courtroom's air was thick with tension as Isabella's influence was formally stripped away. Her previously untouchable position in Jonathan's life and social sphere was dismantled by the judge's ruling, leaving her vulnerable to scrutiny and criticism. Victoria's reaction was quiet but profound. A sense of relief and vindication washed over her as she realized that the scales of justice had, finally, tipped in her favor. The ruling restored not only her dignity but also her agency, an affirmation that her suffering had been seen, acknowledged, and addressed. Every whispered insult, every public humiliation, and every moment of betrayal had been weighed and considered, and the judgment validated her experience in the most powerful way possible. The courtroom scene itself became symbolic. Witnesses, friends, and even strangers present for the trial felt the weight of moral justice being delivered. Jonathan's posture, once proud and untouchable, now conveyed a subtle vulnerability. His aura of invincibility had been dismantled. Isabella, who had relished the power and control she held over Victoria, now appeared exposed, her manipulation laid bare for all to see. Victoria, in contrast, emerged as a figure of strength and resilience, embodying the triumph of dignity over cruelty. This turning point marked a seismic shift in the story's dynamics. Power, privilege, and wealth were proven insufficient when confronted with truth and accountability. Victoria's perseverance, moral fortitude, and courage had not only reclaimed her personal dignity but had reshaped the social and emotional landscape around her. The courtroom became the stage on which justice, equality, and human decency triumphed over arrogance, betrayal, and indulgence, signaling a profound emotional and moral reversal that would define the rest of their lives. Victoria stepped out of the courthouse with a sense of calm determination that had been absent for months. The media flashes and murmurs of onlookers no longer intimidated her. Instead, they underscored the power of truth, courage, and moral fortitude. She had survived the public humiliation, the emotional neglect, and the betrayal of a man who had once held her trust, and now she was reclaiming her life on her own terms. Every step she took was a declaration of independence, a subtle yet unmistakable message that neither wealth, arrogance, nor cruelty could dictate her destiny. Her focus shifted entirely to the life growing within her and the child she would soon bring into the world. Prenatal appointments, careful planning for the nursery, and nurturing self-care became her priorities. Each movement, each choice, was a step toward protecting her child and ensuring a stable, loving environment, something Jonathan had failed to provide. Victoria's inner strength, forged through months of struggle and isolation, now guided her every decision. She no longer sought validation from Jonathan or feared his opinions. Her independence was absolute, and her self-respect unshakable. Meanwhile, Isabella, the mistress who had once wielded influence and arrogance with ease, quietly faded from public view. Social media posts ceased, public appearances dwindled, and whispers of scandal followed her wherever she went. Her presence, once threatening and dominant, became irrelevant in the face of Victoria's moral victory and resilience. The contrast could not have been more striking, one woman thriving through adversity, the other reduced to a footnote in a story defined by courage and dignity. Jonathan, despite retaining his wealth and social standing, faced the enduring consequences of his actions. Public judgment, scrutiny from business circles, and whispers among social elites served as constant reminders that money could not erase humiliation, ethical failure, or the loss of respect. Every lavish possession, every extravagant display of power, was overshadowed by the personal and social cost of his cruelty. Victoria's triumph was absolute. She had survived, protected her child, and reclaimed the narrative of her life. In reclaiming her life, Victoria embodied resilience, moral authority, and the quiet but unstoppable force of personal empowerment. Her pregnancy, once a source of vulnerability exploited by betrayal, had become a symbol of strength. The child she carried represented hope, continuity, and the future she would now shape independently. The story reached its emotional peak here. Victoria had not only survived unimaginable hardship but had turned suffering into triumph, demonstrating that dignity, courage, and maternal strength could outshine wealth, power, and betrayal. Months had passed since the courtroom drama had brought Jonathan Reed to his knees, and Victoria's life had transformed in ways that reflected strength, resilience, and independence. She now lived in a peaceful, sunlit home, filled with the laughter of her child and the quiet comfort of a life rebuilt on her own terms. Every day was guided by love, care, and purpose, with her priorities clear: her child's happiness, her own well-being, and the cultivation of a future free from the shadow of betrayal. She no longer carried the weight of humiliation or fear, her confidence having grown from the trials she had endured. Jonathan, despite his immense wealth and continued influence in business circles, was a man diminished in ways money could not repair. Socially isolated and morally scrutinized, he faced constant reminders of the consequences of his cruelty. Invitations once guaranteed, relationships once cultivated, and admiration once commanded now existed under the harsh glare of judgment. His public persona, carefully constructed over years, had been shattered, leaving him wealthy but hollow, a cautionary example of how arrogance and betrayal carry lasting consequences. Isabella, the mistress whose arrogance had once seemed untouchable, faded into irrelevance. The allure of her influence vanished under public scrutiny, leaving her with nothing but the memory of a power she had abused. Meanwhile, Victoria's triumph was absolute, built not on wealth or status, but on courage, dignity, and moral integrity. The story closes on a powerful note: cruelty, emotional abuse, and betrayal cannot escape accountability. Victoria's journey serves as a message of hope, justice, and empowerment, showing that resilience and inner strength can overcome even the most ruthless acts of manipulation. Her life, restored and thriving, stands as a testament to the enduring power of truth, courage, and the unwavering determination to reclaim one's dignity against all odds.